The subcommittee will come to order. Administrator Gordon Haggerty, I want to thank you and your team for being here today and for all the extra effort you make to inform our members. We continue our budget hearings with the Department of Energy's fiscal year 2021 request for the National Nuclear Security Administration. The Nnsa and its workforce are responsible for the consequential mission of ensuring the safety, security, and effectiveness of our nation's nuclear deterrent. This includes non-proliferation activities and powering the Navy's nuclear ships and submarines, and I cannot overstate the enormity of this mission. I know that each of you here today feel that weighty responsibility. I want to take a moment to recognize two important milestones. 20 years ago, Congress created the Nnsa. This year also marks the 25th anniversary of the science-based Stockpile Stewardship program, which gives us confidence in our nuclear deterrent without underground testing and allows for a reduced stockpile size. I want to be clear, maintaining a safe, credible, and reliable nuclear deterrent is a national priority, but we must do so in a cost-effective, responsible manner, and this budget request does neither. I have serious concerns about this request. At this very hearing last year, I warned that the increases proposed then were not sustainable year after year, and yet the administration has doubled down on its unrealistic request, proposing to grow to the 12% increase in fiscal year 2020 that we are living through to 25% in 2021. I said that correctly, a 25% increase. To put it plainly, this budget is not realistic or executable. It is based upon overly optimistic assumptions. In fact, I'm becoming more convinced that Congress could write a blank check and Nnsa still would not be able to deliver on its budget and schedule commitments. In analyzing the budget justification documents, which were shared with us only hours before the Secretary testified last week, it is clear Nnsa is trying to do far too much, too quickly. Past precedent tells us that when we try to go too fast and don't do the upfront planning, Nnsa makes costly mistakes. The fact of the matter is that nuclear deterrence is too important to get it wrong. We don't have an unlimited defense budget, and as such, the answer cannot be limitless funding. Making budgets require making strategic choices. Turning to nonproliferation, deterrence and diplomacy are complementary. The Department's nuclear nonproliferation programs have been a cornerstone of our efforts to prevent nuclear material from getting into the wrong hands, both internationally and at home. Yet this budget request proposes cuts to the global material security program that is so vital to these efforts. In addition to rectifying this, I also believe that we need to take a fresh look at emerging threats as nuclear technologies evolve and as nations try to acquire them. The Nnsa makes up a sizable portion of this subcommittee's bill. As such, we have a solemn obligation to the taxpayers to ensure that limited federal resources are provided as part of a balanced, coherent strategy. And again, thank you for your service to our nation and for being here today. With that, I'll close my remarks and turn to our ranking member, Mr. Simpson, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairwoman Capter. I'd like to welcome our witnesses here today to this hearing. It is a distinguished and knowledgeable panel with whom we've had a good discussion in previous hearings. Thank you all for being here today. I look forward to hearing from you on the fiscal year 2021 budget request for the Nnsa. The President's budget request for the Department of Energy shows a strong commitment to enhancing our U.S. national security. The request for the Nnsa is just under $19.8 billion. This funding will advance the modernization of the nuclear weapons stockpile and its supporting infrastructure, prevent, counter, and respond to nuclear proliferation and terrorism threats, and to support the Navy's nuclear propulsion needs. I know there have been some concerns expressed about the increased request for the weapons activities account. But one thing we need to keep in mind also is why we are where we are today. After the end of the Cold War, many thought the need for a credible nuclear deterrent was gone, or at least reduced. So many of the programs related to our nuclear weapons stockpile were reduced or eliminated. That may have been correct at the time, but today we know other nations are seeking to advance their nuclear capabilities. To appropriately respond to these evolving and emerging threats, we must continue the modernization of the stockpile and its supporting infrastructure. To do so requires reestablishment of many critical capabilities in an expeditious manner and continued effort to make advancements through science and technology. These activities will require a full and capable workforce. The budget request is in support of these requirements. Many of these programs are by necessity ambitious and will require sustained attention to good program and project management. I believe the Nnsa leadership assembled here with us today is up to the task. I look forward to today's discussion on the importance of your work and how the budget request will strengthen our national security. Chairwoman Kaptur, thank you for calling this hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. And before we turn to our witnesses today, I want to remind our members that we will follow our usual order for questioning. I also want to note that today I will be deferring to Mr. Visclosky for the first round of questions, as he has joined us briefly before he must chair his own hearing in the Defense Subcommittee. I am pleased to have our witnesses here today. We will hear from the Honorable Lisa E. Gordon Hagerty, who is the Undersecretary for Nuclear Security and Administration for Nnsa Administrator. Gordon Hagerty is responsible for the nation's nuclear security enterprise, and she has more than 30 years of experience in nuclear security. She has served in private industry and has held positions on the White House National Security Council and the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. We will then hear from Admiral James F. Caldwell, who is the Deputy Administrator for the Office of Naval Reactors. Admiral Caldwell is responsible for managing NNSA's nuclear propulsion program. Admiral Caldwell's sea tours include service in both the Atlantic and Pacific fleets and multiple operational assignments. Thank you all for being here today. Without objection, your written testimony will be entered into the record. Please feel free to summarize your remarks to approximately 5 minutes. Ms. Gordon Hagerty, thank you for being here.
Chairwoman Kaptur, Ranking Member Simpson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to present the President's fiscal year 2021 budget request for the Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration. As always, it's a privilege to sit before you today, representing the fine men and women of the NNSA. We are grateful for your demonstrated strong, bipartisan support for the NNSA's national security missions and the people that execute them every single day. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the NNSA's establishment by Congress, although, of course, our heritage goes back much further to the Manhattan Project and to the Atomic Energy Commission. And as always has been the case since the nuclear security enterprise's creation, the effectiveness and credibility of America's nuclear capabilities reassures our friends and allies and serves as the ultimate deterrent against a nuclear attack by those who wish to harm us. In this regard, NNSA serves a unique role in supporting our nation's national security. The $19.8 billion budget request for NNSA reflects President Trump's strong commitment to ensuring America has a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent for decades to come. This funding also affirms the administration's continued work to reduce threats posed by nuclear proliferation and nuclear terrorism, as well as providing militarily effective nuclear propulsion for the United States Navy's fleet of aircraft carriers and submarines. The weapons activities request of $15.6 billion will allow us to modernize the nation's nuclear stockpile and infrastructure and meet national security requirements after decades of neglect. It will modernize the stockpile with 5 weapons modernization programs, execute stockpile sustainment activities, conduct annual assessments for all weapon systems, and with this request, we will continue the dismantlement and disposition of weapons and components from the weapons retired from our stockpile and support production modernization activities for non-nuclear components and strategic materials, including a 2-site plutonium pit production strategy. We will also continue to recapitalize NNSA's aging infrastructure, including the Y-12 uranium processing facility and the Idaho spent fuel handling facility. As many of you have witnessed firsthand, our entire enterprise continues to age, with much of our infrastructure operating far beyond its design life. With this increase, we will finally be able to modernize the enterprise. Our Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation request of $2 billion marks the third year in a row that the Trump administration has sought an increased funding for NNSA's nonproliferation and counterterrorism programs and fully funds DNN priority program requirements. This reflects the administration's strong commitment to reducing global nuclear threats and to arms control efforts that advance U.S., allied, and partner security. It will enable us to continue to build domestic and international capacity to secure and, where possible, eliminate nuclear and radioactive materials and prevent nuclear smuggling. Further, this request allows us to maintain a robust nuclear counterterrorism capability to respond to nuclear and radiological threats, including nuclear forensic activities, to attribute the source of material used in a terrorist attack. We will advance our capabilities for detecting and monitoring foreign nuclear material and weapon production activities. Equally important is the Naval Reactors budget request of $1.7 billion. It enables us to provide for the continued safe, reliable, and long-lived operation of the U.S. Navy's nuclear fleet, which accounts for more than 40% of the Navy's major vessels. Finally, our federal salaries and expenses budget of $454 million will allow us to recruit, train, and retain a highly skilled workforce of 1,858 federal employees. Madam Chairwoman, it is true that our timeline for modernizing the nuclear stockpile and recapitalizing the necessary infrastructure is aggressive. In some cases, we are asking our sites and partners to do in 10 years what has traditionally taken 15 to 20 years. But in the 2 years since being confirmed, I have seen firsthand the nuclear security enterprise workforce's passion and dedication and what we can accomplish. Consequently, while the schedule may be aggressive, I believe it's achievable. However, we can only do so with consistent and sustained funding, and most importantly, our continued partnership with Congress. I would also like to thank our NNSA Deputy Administrators, Dr. Charlie Verdon, Dr. Brent Park, and Admiral Frank Caldwell for your leadership, dedication, and commitment to our enterprise and to our great nation. Thank you again for your strong support and the subcommittee's strong support and the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm ready to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Administrator Gordon Haggerty. Admiral Caldwell?
Chairwoman Capter, Ranking Member Simpson, and distinguished members of this subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. I also thank the subcommittee for consistently supporting naval reactors, enabling my team to provide the Navy with propulsion plants that give our nuclear-powered warships the incredible advantage of unmatched reliability, speed, and endurance to carry out the national security missions that they do around the world. Our national security strategy and national defense strategies recognize an increasingly dynamic and complex global security environment, marked by the reemergence of great power competition. Nuclear propulsion remains critical to our national security posture. Today, over 40% of the Navy's major combatants are nuclear-powered, including 11 aircraft carriers and 68 submarines. Naval Reactors' budget request for fiscal year 21 is for $1.68 billion. That's an increase of $35 million, or 2.2% from our FY20 request. Our budget request supports 3 national priority projects. The first project supports the Navy's #1 acquisition priority by developing the new propulsion plant for the Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine, which will feature a life-of-ship reactor core. That core is made possible by reactor technologies developed over many decades. The FY 2021 request will continue supporting oversight of lead ship propulsion plant design and safety analysis work. The second project is refueling and overhauling a land-based reactor in New York. There is a dual benefit to this effort. First, enabling continued research and development, and then providing 20 more years of training for new fleet operators. The project has been working through performance challenges associated with the integration of workforces from multiple shipyards. However, recent performance has shown improvement. The The third project is constructing the new Naval Spent Fuel Handling Facility in Idaho, which will enable long-term, reliable processing and packaging of spent nuclear fuel from naval reactor plants. Market conditions such as a shortage of skilled labor, high construction demand, and a remote location coupled with price volatility for domestic construction materials have resulted in higher than anticipated costs. However, we have taken action to minimize impacts to project cost and schedule. Congress's full support of this project has allowed us to make significant progress. Last year, we began construction activities, and later this year, we will begin pouring concrete backfill and foundations. This year's budget also invests in three key areas: supporting today's nuclear fleet, developing advanced reactor technology for future classes of nuclear-powered warships, and modernizing critical infrastructure and reducing the program's legacy environmental liabilities. I want to assure the committee that our budget planning efforts are done with rigor. Although two of our major projects are facing challenges over the last year, I continue to pursue efficiencies to help offset cost increases and schedule changes that these projects have experienced. This puts pressure on other parts of my program, specifically in the areas of research and development as well as facility recapitalization. However, I recognize the budget constraint this country faces, and I will continue to effectively manage the resources that Naval Reactors is allotted. I respectfully urge your support of our fiscal year 2021 budget request, and I thank this committee for their longstanding support of Naval Reactors. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Admiral. Now we're going to turn to our very long and able-serving member of this subcommittee, Congressman Peter Visclosky, who also chairs our Defense Appropriations Subcommittee.
Madam Chair, Mr. Simpson, and the members of the committee, I do appreciate the special consideration. There's 5 of us on this subcommittee that have another hearing on defense. I do think the work you do is incredibly important. I have served on this committee since another century, and typically would ask questions, but just want to express some concerns as we proceed with the 21 budget. Do believe our role is to make sure we have rigorous oversight, so obviously we are spending the taxpayer dollars properly. My concern, first of all, is that according to the agency's fiscal year 2020 Stockpile Stewardship Management Plan, Nnsa did not intend to ask for more than $15.5 billion for weapons activity until the early 2030s. Yet, this year, you are seeking $15.6 billion for weapons activity, which represents an increase of over 25% from current year levels. I would also emphasize that I'm highly skeptical that Nnsa has the capacity to spend $15.6 billion in fiscal year 2021, given that the agency continues to sit on a very large sum of unobligated and uncosted balances. Secondly, I am always and have been concerned that you're on the receiving end from requests from the Department of Defense. We need it, we'll supply it. Well, maybe we have constraints in making that supply necessary. The case in point is this year there is a $53 million request for Nnsa to begin work on the new W-93 warhead, a project that was previously not expected to begin until 2023, and we had a discussion with the United States Navy earlier today at the Defense Subcommittee. The Nnsa recently completed the life extension program for the W-76-1 warhead and is in the process of modernizing the W-88 warhead for submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Given these efforts, it is unclear to me why we must begin funding the development of the W-93 this year. Last month, the U.S. STRATCOM commander appeared before the Defense Subcommittee and in his written remarks expressed his concerns over the atrophy of our nuclear weapons supporting infrastructure and the resulting risk. Yet in spite of that risk, there appears to be no hesitation for another requirement to be added on to an atrophied infrastructure. The administration's insistence that the W-93 warhead will not require a new design also gives me pause. In talking about the infrastructure, it is my understanding that you have about $2.5 billion in deferred maintenance. I'm a maintenance kind of guy. I'm from Gary, Indiana. And my concern is whether or not we should take that before embarking on other things that will stress that infrastructure. And the final point of policy is I have also always believed that it is less costly to spend money on non-proliferation, the prevent of the spread of materials, in preventing other countries from securing these. And this current administration is not the only, if you would, violator of, I think, de-emphasizing to a degree non-proliferation. It's very costly to build these weapons. And I just really wish we would strike a stronger balance between non-proliferation as well as weapons development. Obviously, that is my personal observation. But again, just wanted to be allowed to make those observations, and again, do appreciate the indulgence.
Thank you very much, Congressman Visclosky. And now we'll turn to our very long-serving member on this subcommittee also, Congressman Ken Calvert, who's the ranking member on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee as well.
Excuse me. Thank you, and I appreciate your coming out here today. The nuclear modernization effort you're all spearheading is obviously a top priority for our 2021 budget request for the National Security Administration. Comes in at $19.8 billion. It was mentioned almost 20% increase from the FY20 numbers. We're also aware of the very tight schedule that your systems are operating in order to replace the nuclear triad. Given that there's very little margin or room for error on these programs, can you please give a quick rundown on whether these nuclear weapons piece of the following programs on time and your confidence level that they'll be delivered as expected? Excuse me. The ground-based strategic deterrent, replacing the Minuteman III. 2, the Columbia-based sub, or the Ohio replacement. And 3, the B-21 bomber program. If you could go through that for us, that would be great.
Mr. Calvert, I can,
Wrong pipe.
I can address
I have
the,
any problems here. Everybody calm down.
I can address the GBSD or the 87-1 replacement. There have been some slippages in the FPU date, in the first production unit date, based on the fragility of our infrastructure, which I think is rightfully stated. Because of the fragility of our infrastructure, that we've let it to decay. We've allowed it to decay over the last 20 years. We're finding that we have a vendor base, a problem with our vendor base, and for the capacitors or from other components for the nuclear weapons stockpile that certainly we haven't needed them for 20 years, and now all of a sudden we're having this resurgence of 5 modernization programs, and we need these domestically produced or vendor-based products from here in the United States. To the extent we're working very closely with and continue to be aligned with every single program with the Navy and with the Air Force for our nuclear modernization programs. While the FPU will slip a bit, the IOC date is still the same, which means it will be delivered on target and on schedule with the United States Air Force. I would defer to Admiral Caldwell on the Columbia class and the Ohio class replacement Columbia.
Sir, regarding the Columbia, we are going to officially start construction this year in October. And the ship must deliver in 2028 and be to sea in 2031 for its first patrol. My responsibilities on the Columbia class are the design of the reactor plant, including the reactor core, the life of the ship core, as well as the electric drive. Because of the great support that we've received from this subcommittee, I am on pace to support the needs of the Navy in constructing Columbia. In fact, last year I was able to order the reactor plant heavy equipment exactly on schedule. Those are the heavy components that go in the reactor plant. And this year I am starting construction of the reactor core, and I will be able to deliver that core within the required dates that the Navy needs it. On the Department of Navy side, I am funded to develop the integrated power system, or the E-drive, which is an electric motor vice a steam propulsion turbine. And I've been able to actually build a prototypical motor and put that in a facility and start testing that motor and all the components in the integrated power system. And I am on track to support the Navy's needs in constructing the Columbia-class submarine. Takes a lot of work and a lot of oversight, and we're working hard with our industry partners to make sure we deliver. Thank you, sir.
Sir, we can't comment on the B-21. However, I would like to mention something about, I was referring to the 6112 and the delay that we had in the 6112 FPU, but the IOC is the same. The 87-1, which is the 78 replacement for the Minuteman III, is on target for an FPU date of 2030. So we are fully aligned with the Air Force for the 87-1, so my apologies for that. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Madam Administrator, the fiscal year 2021 request for the weapons activities is $15.6 billion, a $3.1 billion increase above last year. Last year, Nnsa said it would need $12.8 billion in fiscal year 2021 to meet its budget and schedule commitments. That should equate to a $350 million increase over what we appropriated last year. However, it leaves about $2.8 billion in this request that was unplanned as of this time last year. As I told Secretary Burlett last week, this budget request is simply sprinting toward failure. We need to take steps to prevent that from happening and give Nnsa more breathing room before falling off the cliff. The program scope has been known for years. What has changed since this time last year to result in such a request for such a large increase?
Madam Chairwoman, the FY21 request was the result of a year-long activity that we undertook throughout the entire Nnsa with all of our labs, plants, and site leadership, our field offices, and our headquarters leadership. And we looked at every single priority that has been given to us by the Department of Defense and those internal to us for nonproliferation and counterterrorism activities. And we took a very hard line on what those priorities were across the entire integrated Nnsa. This is kind of somewhat of an unprecedented activity for us. In fact, this year, we're going to be looking at a zero-based budget requirement. We believe that it's important to spend the taxpayer dollars wisely. When we uncovered this and we looked at the 5 modernization programs, especially in the weapons activities area, we realized that after decades of neglect of our enterprise, it was time that we received the critical resources to upgrade our infrastructure and modernize our entire nuclear enterprise. We have facilities that are nearing 70 years old in which we are operating. More than 30% of the facilities across Nnsa enterprise, more than 30% are over 70 years old. More than 40% are over 50 years old. We are working through those facilities in the best possible way, and to the point of where we're throwing good money after bad. That is why it's time to modernize our infrastructure and recapitalize and reconstitute the nuclear security enterprise. It's because we haven't paid attention to it. Perhaps call it the peace dividend, call it what you will, but we've lost vendor capacity, we've lost our personnel. We are on a massive corporate approach to hiring. I'm glad to say that we've hired 7,700 people across our nuclear security enterprise to date this year, through the end of fiscal year 19. We lost much of that project management, program management, laboratory scientific expertise at our 3 laboratories and our weapons plants and sites. And now we need to reconstitute and recapitalize that. We are at a tipping point. Even GAO yesterday in their testimony, I had the pleasure to testify before the House Armed Services Committee, and GAO even expressed their concern about doing this. They were cautious, my words, cautiously optimistic. They were questioning whether or not we could do it. Yes, we are asking. We are seeking to do things in 10 years that traditionally would take 15 to 20 because we work in the nuclear weapons complex. That is not building homes. With all due respect, that is building nuclear-grade facilities, and we are constructing those and working for a modern, resilient enterprise. And the foundation of this goes to our nuclear deterrent, because the Department of Defense sets the requirements, but it is the Nnsa that maintains the nuclear weapons stockpile, thus our national security for our nation. And that is what we're seeking, is the 21 budget request of $19.8 billion is to do just that, is to preserve our nuclear deterrent.
Thank you, Madam Administrator. You know, you may have a very good strategic plan in place, but I don't believe that it actually is a realistic annual request. But I think the effort to put forward an overall number may be a very useful exercise, and I congratulate you for doing that. But again, I think that there are some dangers in the type of proposal that you've submitted to date. I wanted to ask one other question, and then we'll turn to the ranking member. The request also includes a 77% increase above last year to support activities to produce new plutonium pits for warheads. Our fiscal year 2019 bill required Nnsa to deliver a plan that includes the scope of work, cost, schedule required to meet its pit production target, and we are still waiting. So when specifically will you deliver this plan to us? Please know, without a plan, we have nothing to evaluate this request against. Why should we give Nnsa additional funding for these efforts when it is not clear that you even have a plan?
And we have a plan. We are working through it right now. It's in its final draft stages, and I've been assured that it will be on my desk shortly and then delivered to Congress soon thereafter.
Do you have a target date?
Soon. I've made it our #1 priority with defense programs to ensure that it comes to my desk very, very soon.
And any of your associates are we talking 3 months, 6 months?
It's in the concurrence process now, ma'am, so it's just when the people that have to do the concurrence process.
And how many people does that have to go through, Doctor?
It's at least three additional organizations before it comes back to the administrator.
All right, so we're talking several months.
So we'll gladly come up to brief. We would offer that.
In fact, that's a great idea. Thank you, Dr. Verdon. We would gladly brief you on our final draft plan because, again, it's in concurrence, and we don't expect any significant changes to it because it's a plan drafted by defense programs. So those that are seeing it from the outside in, if you will, where it's currently in concurrence, shouldn't have any significant changes. Again, we'll offer to the entire subcommittee to we'll gladly brief you on that as soon as you'd like.
But again, you can understand, Madam Administrator, why we might be concerned
Absolutely.
about other requests that are far beyond the scope of what we believe can be realistically achieved. I thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Verdon, as well. I'd like now to turn to our ranking member, Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Madam Administrator, before I get into the specifics of the budget request, I'd like to start with why we're discussing an active program to begin with. I guess it's because of the neglect of the past that we're looking at this type of budget increase. Could you please describe the impacts of our nuclear deterrent and national security if modernization programs don't happen? And are there budgetary impacts for either the Nnsa or DOD if Nnsa's schedule is delayed?
Mr. Simpson, I'm glad you recognize that after years of neglect, after decades of neglect, we find ourselves in the untenable position of trying to modernize and recapitalize our entire infrastructure while working on 5 major modernization programs as directed by the Department of Defense. So yes, it's a challenge for us. And if we are absolutely aligned right now with the Department of Defense, and we're working very closely with the Air Force and with the Navy, who drive the requirements for our major modernization programs. If we slip on our schedule, then that requires then slippage for the Air Force or for the Navy, which means now we're touching the deterrent and we're actually making decisions on what the deterrent's capabilities and capacities will be. And we rely foundationally on a strong strategic deterrent. And so if we continue to slip to the right, so to speak, then what does that say to our allies and to our partners, and equally important to our adversaries, about the capability, quality of our nuclear deterrent? So yes, it has profound changes, and also it's going to cost even more if we continue to slip the modernization programs that are necessary for our nuclear security enterprise.
Thank you. I've been in some of those buildings, and I don't know that I'd like to work in some of those that have been around for 70 or so years. They're risque, to say the least, especially when you're doing nuclear work. Mr. Visclosky mentioned the uncosted balances in his comments. Nnsa has significant uncosted balances from prior years. Sometimes these carryover balances are planned, as with capital equipment procurement and construction projects where appropriations are needed to begin the activity, but dollars are often spent slowly over a period of time or even not until towards the end of the activity. Other times, uncosted balances can show trouble in executing the program as planned or even simply cost excess funds. What proportion of NNSA's uncosted balances is obligated due to activities like capital equipment, procurement, and construction? And do these proportions vary from program to program, specifically weapons and nonproliferation? And for the record, can you please provide how NNSA's carryover compares with other federal agencies?
Thank you. NNSA has worked significantly to minimize our carryovers, and we continue to make sure that this process is transparent with with members of Congress. I'm pleased to report that at the end of fiscal year 19, NNSA had a net funds carryover of $637 million out of a $15 billion budget. That is equal to or below that of other federal agencies and departments. And just as GAO said yesterday in our hearing, they believed that it was consistent with that and it was appropriate to have that kind of carryover. In FY19, we did have $8 billion of carryover. And despite that massive number, that is reasonable for NNSA in executing a $100 billion program over 5 years. GAO, again, had stated that that was appropriate, and while, for example, Naval Reactors has a 46% carryover, which is considered efficient, NNSA has a 49% carryover efficiency. And again, if you look across the federal governments and agencies, we've seen a chart recently that shows NNSA is equal to or below most other federal agencies.
Thank you. Admiral Caldwell, let me ask you, I understand that Naval Reactors is the Advanced Test Reactor's largest customer. How does the ATR support the Navy's mission? And as you are aware, ATR is aging and experiencing infrastructure deficiencies. How does this impact your research and development efforts?
Thank you for the question, sir. The Advanced Test Reactor is absolutely vital to Naval Reactors' responsibilities. Over many decades, we've been able to take fuel, materials that we want to understand how they would perform in a radiation, in a field, in a flux, and evaluate them in the Advanced Test Reactor. This reactor has allowed us to make significant advances in the life of our reactor cores. For example, Nautilus was refueled at about the 18 to 24-month period, and now we're talking about building Columbia, which will have a life of ship core over 40 years. That would not have been possible without the Advanced Test Reactor. So we're very much involved with it, and we're very much interested in making sure we have that capability as a nation. That said, we're involved with DOE NE to make sure that we have a plan to maintain the current systems. And we're on a 5-year rolling maintenance plan that's designed to go repair and modernize and fix some of the support systems. That said, we're still not executing to the amount of operational days that I need. And we're also thinking about the future. We're looking to see if the Advanced Test Reactor can have its service life extended out to the year 2085. That analysis work is being done in conjunction with my team, and we will have an answer in the 2023 or 2022 timeframe. But that all said, we need that capability. If we're going to continue to develop these advanced cores for the Navy, I need to be able to test in something like the Advanced Test Reactor.
Thank you. And if anybody thinks that refueling one of these submarines is a simple project of just carrying rods down and putting them in, go up to Groton. It is a amazing process that they go through to refuel one of these submarines, and I can believe the savings that will come from not having to refuel these when you have life of the ship reactors.
That's correct, sir. In fact, with the Columbia program, we're going to be able to do the mission with 12 submarines versus the current 14 in the Trident force. That will save the nation on the order of $40 billion over the life of the program.
Thank you.
Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator, I know you're aware that your budget request includes a future year's nuclear security program, and that provides a guidepost for Congress's future budget, for the future budget requests that we can expect from you. In FY20, your budget request told us that the NNSA out-year budget estimates were fully consistent with the 2018 Nuclear Posture Review. But fiscal year 21, as we've been discussing this afternoon, you're requesting $2.8 billion above the amount you expected to request, according to the FY20 budget plan. I understand that the infrastructure is aging, that it's important for us to keep competitive, and that was your response. But just last week, the Secretary of Energy testified that the proposed increase in the request would, quote, pull forward infrastructure projects. What specific infrastructure projects would be pulled forward with this increase? And why should the subcommittee pull forward any work at all when NNSA can't even keep pace with your current work?
Representative Wasserman Schultz, I would say that we are on time and on budget with all of our work and our workload and our construction. In fact, I can use UPF, which is our uranium processing facility at Y12, which has remained on budget and on schedule for 7 years in a row. That facility will be $6.5 billion and completed by the end of 2025. That is huge, major capital construction.
Reclaiming my time for a moment.
Okay, so to your question, we looked at, we worked with our labs, plants, and sites and looked at the highest priorities and prioritized all the missions that we must execute in 2021 and beyond. And in order to have the uplift, to receive that uplift and to work across the entire enterprise, our tritium finishing facility request will be pulled to the left. That facility, tritium, is a critical strategic material needed in nuclear weapons. We have a facility in which we're operating that is over 60 years old. That is a single point of failure. We can speak at classified terms and numbers about what happens to the stockpile if we lose our tritium capability. And that also goes with other strategic materials such as the lithium processing facility at Y12. We need to move these facilities to the left. We have had these planned for decades, and they continue to slip. It's time we finally revitalized and recapitalized our infrastructure. So those are just two examples.
Thank you. But it seems that NNSA and DOE were not really on the same page and using different assumptions to build your budget request. I don't understand why that's the case. The Secretary's preferred number for NNSA, in an attempt, was that an attempt by the Department to prioritize NNSA's workload because the agency right now appears to them to have its hands full? This is you had a large discrepancy between his preferred number and what ended up in the budget request. It really appeared that you outmaneuvered your own secretary in pursuit of an unrealistic, wildly fantastical number. I get that we have to catch up, and we certainly need to make sure that we keep our national security needs paramount. But you can't catch up for 30 years in 5 years. That's just not possible. We deal with finite budget authority in the appropriations process. NNSA doesn't have the capacity to deal with the funds that you've requested. We have other priorities, and NNSA can't just suck up all the money. So I really don't understand how you ended up with as has been expressed on both sides, and the concern expressed on both sides, a much larger number than you seem to have the capacity to spend and that we have the capacity to appropriate for you.
Representative, all I can say is that I've been through the labs, plants, and sites, our field offices.
No,
and I know that we can.
I know that, except that
I am betting on our infrastructure and our personnel.
Reclaiming my time, because I want you to answer my question. I've heard you go on about what is so important about this. I understand it's important, but your secretary of your department had a preferred number for NNSA, and you appear to have outmaneuvered him and gotten a larger number. And that discrepancy is very clear that you don't have the capacity to spend the funds even if we appropriated every dollar to you. You can't possibly expect us to give you that much money in this small part of the budget and be able to deal with the other priorities that we have to deal with.
So to the extent the executive branch went through our processes, they were respectful processes, and we followed the president's direction of his number one priority, which is modernizing the nuclear triad. And the requests that we have asked for.
You went up the chain, and you
Pardon me?
went straight up the chain.
No, sir. No, ma'am, I did not. I worked through the regular process internally, and our internal executive branch discussions are just that. And we worked very closely with the Secretary of Energy to explain our position.
Okay, that's not the information that I have. Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Congressman Newhouse.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to all of you. Appreciate you being here this afternoon with us. I had a particular question for you, Administrator Gordon Haggerty, as well as Dr. Park. As you know, the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory is in my district, and they are a leader in protecting against the threats of nuclear proliferation. We talked about that just a little bit prior to the hearing. So I was pleased to see the strong investment in your budget as it relates to the non-proliferation stewardship program. Probably most of my colleagues are very familiar with the Stockpile Stewardship program, but could you share with us the role of the non-proliferation stewardship program and how in your estimation that this program is going to help us maintain our ability to deter proliferation in this modern age?
Thank you, Representative Newhouse. Let me say I'm very pleased to report, as I mentioned in my opening statement, that this is the third year in a row that the Trump administration has sought additional and increased budgets for our nuclear nonproliferation program. We're very pleased with it. It is complementary to and supported by our defense program's activities. I'd be delighted to turn to Dr. Park and give you some ideas about some of the activities that we have ongoing in the defense nuclear nonproliferation program.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And more than anything else, I truly appreciate all your constant, continuous support for the non-proliferation program. So thank you so much for that. The PNNL is a critical component, critical member of our National Lab response team. And going back to your question about the non-proliferation stewardship activities, it's about people. We need to focus on training the next generation people, and this program will allow that. And we need to actually have a program that is sustainable and steady state, and we will pursue a couple of large initiatives that will involve a PNNL, along with the Los Alamos and Plutonium Science Institute. And although Mr. Fleischman just left, we will pursue Uranium Science Institute with the Oak Ridge and the other laboratories. So this is our the bedrock for training the next generation people. And at the same time, it's not just empty training. They will get to do meaningful, mission-focused work. So they'll get to have very classified information with which they can do research and develop new tools and come up with the new technologies to do sample analyses. Hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about nuclear forensics. But again, this is a cornerstone of how we train the next generation. So your support for this program is very much appreciated, and we're counting on it.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. I appreciate you sharing that with us, and critical to our efforts. And again, thank you all for being here with us this afternoon. I appreciate the frank testimony, the response to the questions, and look forward to working with you as we move forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Congresswoman Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Administrator, for being here, and thank you, the panel, all for being here today. And I especially want to congratulate Dr. Verdon for choosing a great university for your doctorate, University of Arizona, in my hometown of Tucson. So we're happy about that. I also have a concern about the unspent funding, and I know that you said you've got a plan to spend it. Do you also have a timeline that you can provide for us as to when that money is going to be spent down?
Absolutely, we do. And we've been sharing with the staffs of the subcommittees and the full committee, and we will continue to do so. But we are working judiciously to spend down those resources. I do want to make a point about spending down resources, though. While we have specific task for all of the defense programs-related activities. For example, in the non-proliferation program, some of those carryovers that we see, those unexpected carryovers, some of the programs that we undertake, such as the most recent successful removal of 700 kilograms of highly enriched uranium from the United Kingdom, took several years to accomplish. Once we sign an agreement with them, and that goes not only for the UK, but all of the materials that we return or work with to secure around the world, are multi-year faceted programs. You don't just sign an agreement and then bring the material back, much like you don't just refuel a submarine. It takes many years to put the plan together and to execute that mission and then bring it back to the United States or secure it in place or take it to a third country. So while we might receive the request for resources, receive the budget, the appropriations in 1 year, we might have that over several years before we can expend it all. So in some cases, there are people view that as, well, those are unobligated, unspent resources, and there's nothing further from the case. The worst case would be is that we use those resources for something else, and then at the critical time when we want to bring the materials back or secure it, those resources aren't there, and then we have to come back to Congress for additional appropriations, and that's not a good use of taxpayer dollars.
So are those funds obligated then?
They're technically obligated, but they show up in different columns, and we are working also to make sure that we're more transparent in those kinds of long lead time activities. And so, yes,
we would
the answer is
appreciate
yes.
that as
Certainly.
the committee, because I mean we're charged with oversight
Absolutely.
of the program, and I feel like we're just not getting all the information.
Okay.
My next question is for Dr. Park, and this I'm going to change the subject slightly to the nuclear security challenges. What nuclear security challenges are you most concerned about, and what are you doing to address these threats?
As it turns out, it's not a single event. It's not a single topic that we're worried about. It's a string of events. So I'll provide you with a few quick snapshots of what we're worried about. Now, we're worried about countries like Iran, DPRK, and so on and so forth, and how to actually work with like-minded countries and work with the IAEA and so on and so forth to make sure no materials leave these countries and they don't advance their nuclear programs. At the same time, if you go far to the right, into the future, we're worried about there are more countries now than ever before who want to own nuclear power plants, for example. We want to actually be in the game ahead of the curve to make sure they actually apply all these nuclear technologies for peaceful purpose. So it's actually a wide spectrum of challenges that we're facing, and that's exactly the program that we have in the DNN. So we actually look at wide variety all at the same time, as a function of time, as a function of location, as a function of how we can team up with other countries and so on. This is an international effort to a large extent. So as much as we have leadership on many of the things, we work with the IAEA, we work with the UK, we actually have a great relationship with Japan to make sure that they are actually giving up the materials they don't need anymore. In fact, I'm happy to report to this committee that we're in the process of retrieving 90 kilograms of S&M from Japan this coming year, special nuclear material. So it's not a single event. It's actually the one thing that I need to emphasize is that we cannot take our eyes off on the things we have been doing. We've been converting high-performance research reactors that use HCU. We are converting it to use LEU. We cannot low-enriched uranium. Thank you. We cannot slow those efforts down, by the way, and chase after new concerns. We need to maintain a steady state effort, if you would, in all the things we've been doing, and then continue to make progress and be ahead of the curve and the phrase that the chairman used, anticipating threats, and that's actually what we do. So again, it's a connection of all these events that would drive our program requirements.
Madam Chair, I have one other quick question. May I extend my time? And so it sounds to me like you need highly trained engineers and scientists to do this work. Are you working with universities to make sure that you've got people coming through the pipeline to fill these positions?
Excellent. We actually have a Center of Excellence programs, and we actually have 3 centers supporting over 40 universities, by the way. With your support on the university outreach program, we're doing that. And our labs, by the way, they do their own outreach program that is not part of headquarters efforts. But all the labs that we work with, Los Alamos, PNNL, Oak Ridge National Lab, all these labs have a very robust education program. In fact, when I started my career at Los Alamos in the 80s, I was a PhD student. So there are many of us in the pipeline. So looking at your program to us, yes, we have a robust program, but it's much bigger than you think it is because of our labs. They actually have a robust engagement, literally training thousands of people. If I'm allowed to add one more.
Sure.
I work closely with Dr. Verdon. Many of the programs I support for Ms. Gordon Hegarty, I require Charlie Verdon's people because these are nuclear materials experts. So again, when you see the modernization and the build-up on the defense program side, defense nuclear non-proliferation, we benefit substantially because that's the money that I don't have to invest. But again, this is a close cooperation between the NA10 and NA20 within Nnsa. So we strongly support this cooperation with the university.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I yield back.
Thank you. Congressman Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I had a brief absence. My apologies. I had to run to the floor. We're working on a bipartisan supplemental for the coronavirus, and so my apologies, but that is going very well. Madam Administrator, thank you for being here today to this distinguished panel. I've worked with each and every one of you all for several years, and I know you. I want to thank you on behalf of the Congress, our committee. You've done an exemplary job. Our nation's nuclear deterrent is critically important to the security of our country. Just last week I was at STRATCOM, and I shared my plaudits for this group, and I've received it back as well. So thank you so much for your endeavors. Very quick question, Madam Administrator. I understand in my absence you addressed the issue of UPF replacing Y-12. Thank you for your request for robust funding. We have worked together with this subcommittee to get the resources necessary, I think, to keep that moving. But very briefly, are you pleased with the progress, and how do we plan to keep this on time and on budget?
We're extremely pleased with the process, and as I mentioned in your absence, this is a program, a $6.5 billion major construction project at Y-12 that will be completed by the end of 2025 for not more than $6.5 billion. To date, we've expended $3.1 billion in contracts and work, and we are on time and on schedule for the 7th year in a row.
And I thank you. In my tenure, we've seen a redesign, we've seen it brought under budget, and just truly a tremendous project. So, and a credit to the men and women and your contractors as well.
And a special credit to our acquisition and project management team at headquarters that has really put some fidelity into our programs.
Agreed. Last week, one of my colleagues from the other side of the dais raised an issue, Madam Administrator, that was a very valid question, but did concern me in terms of the housing of Nnsa, where Nnsa would be. Obviously, I'm very pleased with where it is right now and what you are all doing, but there were some questions that were raised with the Secretary. He made it very clear, I believe, in his response that Nnsa, and I'm using my words, has a safe home here in the Department of Energy. I would like your thoughts on that and just maybe reassurance for the committee as to where you think Nnsa will be housed.
I support the administration's position that Nnsa continue to be housed in DOE as an agency.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As do I. Dr. Verdon, the President's budget requests an additional $109 million for a lithium production facility. How important is this facility to our ability to execute the nuclear mission?
Thank you. It's very important. It's when we as the administrator set out, when we looked at the what the requirements were from the DoD and the facilities we needed to meet those requirements. We're not trying to modernize all the facilities that are 70 years, back from the 70s. We've identified the key facilities to meet the DoD requirements as well as workforce safety. And lithium is one of those facilities where it's an essential material, making essential components for the nuclear weapons, and that's why it's one of our highest priority facilities to bring up to support the DoD's deliverables.
Thank you, sir. My final question, given the challenges associated with the hiring for the unique roles within our defense nuclear establishment, as well as length of the clearance and training process, what steps do you plan to take to be able to execute this budget increase?
Representative Fleischman, we have undertaken a corporate approach to hiring strategy across all of the Nnsa labs, plants, and sites, field offices, and headquarters. And I'm happy to report we hired 7,700 people across our entire enterprise this last year. It's a robust program. We visited colleges and universities, including the University of Toledo. I had the pleasure of visiting with Chairwoman Capter this last year. We are doing a great job. The strength of our program and our national security mission is truly a lure for scientists and engineers, for the technicians we need. We are also undertaking robust programs at different technical colleges for skilled craft that we need across our entire enterprise as well. So we are working along those lines, and we're seeing really, really, really good results as we continue our efforts. It also requires, however, security clearances, as you said. And while we've seen traditionally security clearances that have taken an average of 444 days, we are now seeing approximately 130 days in our security clearance process. We are working closely with OPM, with the Office NBIB that handles the security clearances, and also with the Department of Defense, who is now taking over those programs. We have incredible opportunities. We cannot ask people to come and work with us and serve our nation and have them sit on their hands while they're waiting for their security clearances. And in fact, we're finding other useful work for them to do while we are waiting for their clearances.
Thank you for your thoughtful responses, and again, thank you for what you do for our great nation. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleischman. I wanted to ask you, Administrator Gordon Haggerty, you often talk about all the jobs that are available at Nnsa and different categories of jobs. You're very open to seeking individuals from places in the country that haven't been asked before. But is there an easy way to access the full job list on your website?
Yes. We are working with our labs, plants, and sites. Because of our labs, plants, and sites being unique in their characteristics, they are actually contractors. There are some bureaucratic issues that we are working through about whether or not contractors can look at other contractor websites, and they can look into the federal websites. So we are working through that. That is actually one of the tasks that we have for our management and budget organization, so that we can have a better idea about all the jobs that are available throughout our entire enterprise. And to the extent that we have people that we're hiring, remember, we're coming into that bathtub curve, where in the next 5 years, nearly 40% of our workforce, 35% of our workforce will be eligible for retirement. Right now, it's 21% at our headquarters in our field offices. We've got to do something about getting the workforce of the future in place now, so we have mentorship, so we have some cross-training. We can't just bring them in and expect them to do some jobs, do useful work, and not have any training before them. So we're working along that.
Interrupt in view of the time, but just to say that it's very difficult to try to figure out what those jobs are. And I doubt there's any member of Congress that's sitting up here on the dais that could actually go in front of an audience and read some of the job categories and positions that you're asking for. So somehow Nnsa has to figure out a way to communicate with the general public. And I think all of us would welcome that. So I just wanted to mention it. I heard what you said about contractor difficulties, but just recognize, even when I went to the website, I thought, oh, my goodness.
I take that, and we will
generically, you might be able to prepare a different kind of list that doesn't label a particular lab, but a particular skill. That could be very, very helpful to people. That's just by way of comment. Now, I wanted to move on. Admiral Richard from Stratcom recently noted the nuclear enterprise can only absorb so much work at one time. As I understand it, Nnsa is looking at moving the timeline for the long-range standoff warhead to the right because Nnsa's workload is too great. Is this true? And what are your plans to reduce scope for the W-87-1? Yes.
So as part of any of our weapons acquisition programs, we're always looking, especially in this case where it's mostly the Air Force is developing a new missile at the same time we're developing the warhead for it. We're constantly working on to make sure we're staying synchronized. So we are in that process. We do it almost annually, if not more frequently. We're in that process right now to make sure how their procurement is going, how our work is going, and then if there's a need to change anything based on synchronization. So certainly we do discuss the idea of moving an internal milestone, but we do not do anything to change the IOC or the FOC. Those stay fixed. We look at movements within that to better align the programs. So we are indeed doing that now, but no decisions have been made. They're being teed up now for the Nuclear Weapons Council's consideration based on the results we obtain. But it's just something we normally do to make sure we stay synchronized for both of those programs. And you know, I'll say now, what our look already is we can move an internal milestone with no additional cost increase. So we've already identified that. So that won't be a major issue, but it'll be more synchronization issue for the all up round. And then in terms of the 87, what we have done very recently is we have what we call threshold requirements, which is must-dos. And we have objective requirements, which are, if possible, if they don't have major impact, if the cost is worth the benefit. And so we've had a recent review on the 87 where we had 2 objective requirements that we were still working on, that we accelerated the review of those requirements for their consideration. And we had a lengthy analysis of the benefits, the costs, associated with those requirements. And we brought those before the Nuclear Weapons Council, and a decision was actually made not to go forward with those 2 objective requirements. So we have downscoped, if you like, the requirements that we were carrying on those warheads. All of the threshold requirements are still there, but those 2 objective requirements have been eliminated.
Thank you very much. Administrator Haggerty, you visited our region of Ohio, and we thank you very much for that. You know it's a heavily industrial region, and you, in your testimony again today, have mentioned some of the componentry that you could not, or they're having difficulty acquiring. You mentioned capacitors as one. I'm wondering if you could just generically discuss some of the componentry you're having trouble finding contractors for. And my question would be, how can Nnsa expand its manufacturing base, and will those efforts help reduce your costs? And to supplement some of the academic alliances you currently have, what value would there be in an academic and industry consortium focused on helping Nnsa with its manufacturing needs?
So yes, we are indeed, for many reasons, we are expanding our industrial base. As you mentioned, the capacitor issue, that was a case where we had essentially a single vendor at the time, and we recognized that to add resiliency into our complex, we actually had to expand the number of vendors that could provide us things like electronic components that you mentioned. So we're actively pursuing that and have actually increased the number of vendors that we're now utilizing on in particular, our life extension programs. The same is true for our large construction projects where we're buying a considerable amount of equipment across the United States. We've expanded the vendor bases that we're using there. And we're even reaching out now to some of our great American industries to help us with advancing some of our manufacturing techniques, that instead of just replicating what we did during the Cold War, we're actually using American industry to learn from new manufacturing techniques and beginning to help us prototype those activities to actually bring them into the complex to hopefully make us more efficient than what we had in the past. So we are undertaking all those efforts that you mentioned, and to try to improve, to certainly make the complex more resilient with the goal of also reducing the cost, making us more efficient. And in terms of the academic alliance, it's a great question. We've been actually asking that, and we are starting to look at, because we've recognized that manufacturing is such an important component of how do we expand and what universities can we tap into that could help us in the area of manufacturing and new manufacturing techniques, as I mentioned, so to take advantage of what's being developed and to plan thoughtfully how to bring it into the complex as we go forward. Additive manufacturing is kind of a worked example now, but what's the next great thing out there? And we're starting to look at that now.
Thank you very much. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you. Couple of things. Is it accurate to say that the Secretary of Energy supports the President's budget request, and that includes the NNSA budget,
Yes.
contrary to some of the comments that were made? Could you effectively and efficiently spend the budget request if that request were to come about in the appropriation?
Yes, I'm confident we can execute all of the missions that are given to us.
Let me ask Dr. Verdon. We've heard concerns that various components of the modernization program, including components that are in the early stages, are over budget and behind schedule. With major construction projects, we have a management process with milestones including cost and schedule baselines against which we can measure performance. Is there a couple questions. Is there a comparable management process for programs like the Life Extension Program? And at what point are plans mature enough to produce legitimate cost estimates and schedules against which we can measure whether the Life Extension programs are over budget or behind schedule?
Yes, sir, there are. We use a process that's either called, sometimes you call it the Phase X process or the Phase 6.x process. It's a joint DOD, DOE, and NSA acquisition process, warhead acquisition process, and it's a very rigorous process. And we do have a number of gates, a number of phases that we go through, a number of gates, a number of reports that have to be produced. There's a whole, documentation, a very rigorous documentation of what has to be produced along the way. And there are certainly, like one example is we adhere to, I think it's U.S. Code 2537, I think, which is the selected acquisition reports, is a report to Congress that we provide annually on the schedule, the costs, and so forth. And we would, so we do provide, annual snapshots and even more frequent snapshots of the progress we're making, how we are doing with the budget, how we are doing with the schedule. And, and basically that's how we monitor the progress on the programs, is through those types of activities and other additional reports. Recognize it's a lot of information, and, we would certainly offer that if there's information out of those reports that would make it easier for you to be able to transparently see what we're doing, we'd be more than happy to work with you and your staff to pull out that information, so that you're not having to read these very long reports that we produce. But it is a very rigorous, very rigorous process that we go through.
Appreciate that. Madam Administrator, it's been said that the production of 80 pits per year in 2030 is NNSA's highest infrastructure priority. NNSA is planning to split production between Los Alamos and Savannah River. What is the current cost estimates for each of these projects, and what is the level of fidelity we have for each of these cost estimates? And is Los Alamos on track to produce its first pit for use in a nuclear weapon by 2023 and up to 10 pits by 2024? And what challenges has NNSA and the contractor encountered?
Mr. Simpson, we've made great progress at Los Alamos National Laboratory. In FY18 and FY19, we produced 10 developmental pits. That gives us the opportunity to look at the characteristics of the plutonium pit as we're manufacturing them, so we can get a higher fidelity in how we will ultimately produce the 10 pits per year in 2024, the 20 pits in 2025, and 30 pits per year starting in 2026 in perpetuity. We will continue that process. We are doing great work at Los Alamos in terms of bringing in the necessary equipment to execute that, to put the production mission in place, while we are also undertaking all of the actinide chemistry and the necessary and continued programs that are under the Plutonium Center of Excellence that is housed at Los Alamos. In addition to that, we are working through the conceptual design plan for the Savannah River Plutonium Processing Site, which will use the facility formerly known as the Mixed Oxide Facility, or the MOX facility at Savannah River, that then Secretary Perry terminated in 2018. We've been working with our contractor at the site, the Savannah River Nuclear Solutions Laboratory, or contractor, to develop the conceptual design. We will move forward with that. We will receive that later this year, and we will move to Conceptual Design 1, which is CD1 in FY21. We have a very aggressive program, as I've mentioned before. It is our highest priority, and we believe that we can accomplish this mission. We are doing things in parallel with our Los Alamos and using Livermore experts, since they used to have a plutonium production or plutonium capability at Livermore, which we did inventory in about the 2011 timeframe. So our single plutonium manufacturing capability in the United States at the present time is Los Alamos. We are looking to develop a rigorous and resilient program for our infrastructure in the future. As a reminder, more than 30 years ago, we shuttered the plutonium pit capability in the United States at Rocky Flats, which we did around 1989, 1990. It's time we develop a resilient enterprise for our current and future nuclear deterrent.
Thank you. Finally, Admiral Caldwell, you mentioned in your testimony about the cost, unanticipated cost increases in the fuel handling facility. As we talked, it was a variety of things, but cost of steel and concrete and so forth. And those costs, bids came in at much higher costs than were anticipated. That's putting pressure on your budget in other areas. What other areas are we, is it putting pressure on? Is it putting pressure on the developing new and nuclear technologies, you know, that you put on the shelf and that kind of stuff? And
in this particular case, sir, the budget or the bids that came in substantially over what was expected have put pressure on my facilities and infrastructure spending in fiscal year 21, my request for fiscal year 21. So to accommodate that, I've had to defer two major MCPs and move out some other facilities work that I was planning on doing. But I'm able to handle what I need to do in FY21 within the current request. The challenge will be as we go into future years, FY22 and beyond, I am trying to step up the investment that we make in research and development. We have devoted over the last many years focus on the three major projects, which include the refueling of the reactor in New York, the spent fuel handling facility, and the Columbia project. And now as those projects are in execution, we need to really refocus on developing the advanced technologies that the Navy needs to make the Navy, provide capability to the Navy in the future. Some of those things are advanced instrumentation and control, advanced core concepts to be able to load more fuel in, advanced manufacturing capabilities to reduce cost and schedule duration and improve performance. So there will be pressure on my budget in R&D, research and development, as I go forward. And there will also be pressure on my ability to recapitalize older facilities and to continue an aggressive pace of decontamination and decommissioning activities. So that all said, I've got to figure out how I'm going to manage through that. Right now, I'm prioritizing the research and development, taking some pain in the facilities and infrastructure. But as we come forward, I will work with Nnsa and DOE and your staff here on the Hill to figure out the best way to do that and continue to meet what the Navy needs.
thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Congressman Fleischman.
Madam Chair, I have no further questions. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Administrator Gordon Haggerty, what does the future of the nonproliferation program look like? And I think Dr. Park might want to also address this. How is our country positioning itself to address emergent challenges as other countries seek to harness nuclear energy technologies?
Madam Chairwoman, as we discussed yesterday, I am delighted to have Dr. Park's leadership in our Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation Program. We are embarking on a strategic, on both a parallel path, which is doing the good work of the Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation Program, also looking from a strategic perspective about those emerging countries that are looking to acquire peaceful uses and continue down that path. I'd like to defer to Dr. Park on that, but I think we're making some great inroads, and we have some great strategic planning going on in our efforts. So I think that will pay dividends for our nation and for like nations in the future.
Thank you, ma'am. Again, thank you for your outstanding leadership supporting the NN program, actually all of Nnsa. And as I stated earlier, we actually look at full coverage worldwide. And that requires a steady-state improvements in how we do what we do. For example, in terms of eliminating nuclear materials, or better protecting them, or working with international partners so they can actually better protect the materials they own. And whenever they don't need it, we like to work with them, work with IAEA to make sure we actually have a solution to get rid of them. Eliminate forever is our theme. And at the same time, as the new countries show up interested in nuclear technologies, we prefer they work with the United States through a 123 agreement. But even if they don't, we want to work with the IAEA and like-minded countries to actually share with them what it takes to be nuclear industry nuclear technology owner. And it takes a lot, by the way. So we actually spend a fair amount of energy educating our newcomers to the nuclear technology, the membership. And recently, a year ago, in fact, Administrator Gordon Hegarty and I participated inside a threat symposium where we actually had 60 countries participate. Protection is not just from outside, it's also from within. And many of the countries joining this nuclear technology membership, if you would, they actually did not know what we meant by insider threat. So actually by educating them, there's a softer side of engagement on nuclear nonproliferation, and we do that quite a bit. At the same time, we work with other countries that actually own a substantial amount of nuclear materials, and we like to actually find a way to make sure we have a consistent solution to the international community. And at the same time, but there are many things that we are worried about. One of the things that we actually spend a lot of time on is developing technologies to make sure we actually have a verifiable treaties. So I'm happy to report to you, Nnsa does a substantial technology leadership role, play a substantial leadership role in coming up with the technologies to actually monitor these activities from the ground, from air, space, and so on. And I think we provided multiple classified briefings to you on what we do with the satellites and so on and so forth, working with the U.S. Air Force, for example. We actually have found I could go on, but essentially it's actually important for me to recognize we have a very important counterterrorism program within the DNN, and we actually work with international partners in that area as well, so they can actually respond should there be an incident. We cannot go after every incident that there is in the world. So again, we go out there. We have a very able staff within Nnsa, and they go out there and train them, educate them, and we do tabletop exercises and so on. I mean, I like to respect your time, but again, it's actually in-depth, and that there are new technologies, dual-use technologies that we worry about, that I'm more than happy to cover in a classified setting that we are really spending our time on going forward.
All right, I thank you very much for that, and we might ask for that classified setting briefing. Congressman Simpson? You're finished, okay. Thank you. Final question. Madam Administrator, the department has a clearly defined process for managing construction projects. That really isn't so for ongoing life extension programs and requesting funding for a fifth brand-new warhead program. What specific changes are you making to your current weapons acquisition process to increase transparency for Congress and to avoid future cost increases and schedule delays?
Madam Chairwoman, we've made some significant progress under Dr. Verdon's leadership in this area, and I defer to him to explain exactly how we are upgrading and updating our processes for weapons activities.
Yes, ma'am. Part of our continuous effort to improve and lessons from the B-61 and the 88, we are making changes, improvements to our acquisition process. A couple of highlights that we'd say is We recognize that we need earlier engagement between the design agencies and the production agencies, so those are being implemented. More senior leadership engagement from the M&O sites, not only within their own site, but across the site, improving a shared fate approach and more, more discussion, collaboration amongst the sites. More federal oversight of the technical choices and decisions that are being made. So there's a number of improvements we're making. Those are just a few. We're putting quite a few others in place as well. As I did mention, we do have it's a pretty rigorous acquisition process, and it is. I recognize it contains a lot of information. We try to invite your committee staff members to a quarterly review of all of our life extension programs, so they can hear the updates right from the people that are conducting the programs, to get a status of how they're moving, how they're progressing, where our issues are. As well as the documented reports, as I mentioned, the selected acquisition reports, where we do, document how we're, on an annual basis, how we're doing against costs, how we're doing against schedule. But as of our life extension programs right now, we made the commitment that with the issue we encountered on the B-61 and the 88, that we would fix it from within the portfolio of our life extension programs, and we did that. While if you look at the budget, the 61 and the 88 do go up because of the technical issue we encountered, the 80 and the 87 went down in comparison because we made efficiency improvements on the 80, and we made those down selects that I referenced on the 87. So within the life extension program, we actually balanced the increased costs on the 61 and the 88 through cost savings on the 80 and the 87.
Thank you for placing that on the record, and any additional information you can give us on, I better keep talking. You can give us on how we can have greater transparency for congressional oversight would be greatly appreciated. If you could provide some additional documentation to the record in that regard, I would certainly be very appreciative of that on behalf of the entire committee. We've been fortunately joined by one of our most capable members, whom we are so pleased has joined us here this afternoon, Congressman Derek Kilmer from the state of Washington, who has been a very faithful attendee at everything. I know he had competing committees. So we thank him very much for joining us today. If you have any questions you would like to put forth,
Madam Chair.
We recognize you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My apologies. We had a briefing on the coronavirus with the Vice President, and coming from Washington State, as you can imagine, that's a high priority for us. And I did set the land speed record from that briefing to this committee room. So thank you for being with us. Admiral Caldwell, thank you for your terrific leadership and partnership. And it wouldn't be an opportunity for me to visit with you without checking in on the enterprise disposal issue. The Navy is issuing a contract solicitation for dismantling and disposing of a surface ship support barge contaminated by nuclear materials. And I understand the Navy is establishing a process with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for technical and contractual implementation of NRC regulations governing the disposal of the barge. I also understand that the precedents established with the NRC while dismantling the barge will inform the process of dismantling the aircraft carrier Enterprise. With that in mind, was hoping you could speak to how this contract solicitation and barge work fit into the plan for the disposal of the Enterprise. Is this the template you plan to use for the Enterprise? If you're not sure, what could you discover in the process that leads you to a different model for the Enterprise? And is there anything you have already learned from the barge disposal contract solicitation that you could share?
Thanks for the question, sir, and I understand your interest in this. As you know, it's my responsibility to handle the materials in my program from cradle to grave, and we have a long history of regulating and responsibly dealing with the materials and disposing of them properly, protecting our people and the environment and the program's reputation. The surface ship support barge was a refurbished tanker that was used for defueling Nimitz-class aircraft carriers. It was last used for defueling the USS Abraham Lincoln. And now that system is obsolete because we've implemented new technologies, it's my responsibility to properly dispose of it. So we are moving down a path, and we have submitted requests for proposals, and we have answers back. We're now in the source selection phase, so I won't go into any details on that. But we are working with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and we have had a lot of dialogue with them and have an interagency agreement that we've negotiated with them. What we are learning in this process is that there are a lot of interested parties in this business. As the commercial shipbreaking business has come about, there's a substantial amount of interest. My responsibility is to do this safely, securely, and do it at an affordable way for the nation. So we are, as we go forward, we're continuing to understand and learn about our regulatory framework. We're continuing to learn on other aspects of the job as we move forward. And while it may inform some steps for enterprise, it in no way is determining the answer for enterprise. And in fact, no specific decisions have been made with regards to the enterprise disposal path. That said, we are evaluating options, and we are working on an environmental impact statement. The draft environmental impact statement will be released next year. And it's my promise to you that we'll continue to keep your staff informed as we move forward on this effort.
Thank you. And I appreciate the persistent transparency and engagement with both my team and with me. So thank you for that.
Roger, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, and I'd just like to thank our ranking member, Congressman Fleischman, Congressman Kilmer for being here, and really for having full committee participation today. It was just a great hearing. We thank you very, very much for being with us today. That concludes this afternoon's hearing, and I would like to thank each and every one of our witnesses. I ask the witnesses to please ensure for the hearing record that questions for the record and any supporting information requested by the subcommittee are delivered in final form no later than 3 weeks from the time you receive them. Members who have additional questions for the record will have until the close of business on Monday to provide them to the subcommittee office. Our hearing is adjourned.